When authority tries to take your freedoms away, there is always a counterculture that gives the proverbial finger to Big Brother. And comics is no exception. Welcome to The Artist and the Author. I'm your host, David Plant, and I've got a great show for you today, starting with great illustrations, and we are diving into the forbidden comics. Then on Name That Book, I've got a good one for you today. He is a classic author, and he's got some great books. Then on Self-Publishing Tips, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into actually writing and composing our stories. And don't forget, hit subscribe, smack that little dingy bell, that way you know when I upload new episodes of Artist and the Author, new great music, and other cool videos. Alright, let's get started. All right, hang on to your hat, because we're about ready to jump into the world of underground forbidden comics. So we're going to start out in the 1920s with small erotic comics called Tijuana Bibles. They were also known as the 8-pagers, Tilly and Mac books, Jigs and Maggie books, JoJo books, Bluesies. You had the Blue Bibles, you had the Graybacks, you had the 2x4s. So they were known by a whole bunch of different names. But the typical Tijuana book was an 8-frame comic strip in a 2.5-inch by 4-inch little booklet format. So that way they could be very discreet and you could hide them in your back pocket. Interesting side note for you, there's a cool punk band out right now called Tijuana Bibles. Check them out, got some great music. So the Tijuana Bibles typically took the popular cartoon strips of the day and turn them into erotic comic strips. So some of these comic strips that were used were like Blondie. You had Barney Google. You had Moon Mullins. You had Popeye, which everybody knows who Popeye is. You had Tilly the Toiler. You had the Katzenjammer Kids. Now, this is another little side note for you. There is a band, a Norwegian all-girl band called the Katzenjammers. They're excellent musicians, really cool music. Is another one you should probably check on out. Then you had Dick Tracy. You had Little Orphan Annie, and you had Donald Duck. So now these are just a few of them, but there's a whole bunch of them. And the popularity of these Tijuana Bibles, was highlighted in the 1930s. Roughly around the Great Depression period. But they actually lasted into about the 1960s until they eventually phased out and were replaced by a more mainstream underground comics movement. Now this comics movement came about in the 1950s, the late 1950s, when the Comic Books Association of America came out with the Comics Code Authority. And what that did is that set standards for mainstream comics. It basically prohibited, sexual material, drugs and violence. You were required to represent policemen and officers of the law and judges in a positive light. You had to villainize the bad guys. There were a lot of other different requirements that you needed to follow in order to make a comic book mainstream and meet the Comics Code Authority. So what you would end up with on a mainstream comic like Thor, you would have, up in this top right corner, you would have approved by the Comics Code Authority on your cover. So all your mainstream comics like Thor, you had Superman and Batman and Iron Man, the Hulk, the Fantastic Four, the list goes on of all these great comics. But they all had to follow the Comics Code Authority. But now you had a whole nother genre going on. And this was the underground comics genre. And they spelled comics with an X for two reasons. One was to differentiate it from regular comics, but also the X represented that a lot of the materials in these books were X-rated. So these were for adult comics. But even so, you had some incredible illustrators of the time. So the comics movement kind of peaked during the 60s and 70s. And this was during the counterculture time. Some of the illustrators back then, and they're still around today, a lot of them are still around today, is you had Robert Crumb. So you may recognize this particular piece, Keep on Truckin'. So this Keep on Truckin' became very popular. You saw it everywhere. But he did a lot of different illustrations and artwork. Then you had Gilbert Shelton. And these characters, if you read the Mad magazine, you probably recognize this style character in a lot of the strips that are within the Mad magazine book. Then you had Barbara Willie Mendez. She did a lot of very intricate artwork, and she does a lot of great stuff today. So you should check out some of her her fine artwork. Beautiful stuff. Then you had Trina Robbins, and Trina Robbins was really pushing the feminist movement. You have Kim Deesh, and he did a little bit more psychedelic work. Very cool stuff, though. You had Spain Rodriguez. He also did a lot of promotional posters for the bands back in the day and the concerts. And then you had Art Spiegelman, and his art kind of reminds me of like the Beatles, Yellow Submarine, and the Monty Python, the Flying Circus type artwork. But there are a lot of others at the time as well. These are just some of the more main prominent artists, but a lot of great illustrators back then. So this movement really started taking off. There started a lot of different comic books, and some of the different titles started with Zap, and Zap was actually probably one of the first ones, and it almost single-handedly kick-started the whole movement. But you had others as well. So you had comic books like Bujo Funnies. You had the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. And again, you kind of recognize some of these characters if you read Mad Magazine at all. Then you had the Women's Comics, and this was a women's-only comic book, and this was a push on the feminist movement. You had Young Lust, and this was a bit of a parody on like the 1950s romance novels. And you had RK, the Comics Review. These are just some of the more prominent titles, but there are a whole bunch of them, and a lot of very cool illustrations in all of them. But the movement actually really stretched out over a couple of different areas. It started moving into the film and the television movement. So you started seeing pieces like the Fritz the Cat, which was an animation. And this was actually the first X-rated animated film ever made. And then you had a Dirty Duck, which was another X-rated animation made. But you also had more mainstream titles, such as the Lord of the Rings 1978 animated version of the book. And this kind of picked up on the artwork of the time and the style of this comics underground movement. And you also had shows like the Forbidden Zone. In the Forbidden Zone, if you ever watch it, you'll see that it's Danny Elfman's in there. And that's kind of where he got his kickstart into entertainment. And he moved on to Oingo Boingo. And after Oingo Boingo, he moved into making scores for movies. And he made some really big movie scores. And he did a lot of scores for the Tim Burton movies. Good stuff. Yeah, check him out. And then the style was shown in like the Flying Circus, like I mentioned earlier, of Monty Python's Flying Circus and some of other of Monty Python's work. So it really started moving into the whole culture at the time. So it really set the stage of the entertainment and movies and books and comic books. All kind of started getting into that underground comics style. So what it ended up really kind of happening with that movement is, as it started permeating to all these other industries, it really became less forbidden and more mainstream. In about the 1980s, the early 1980s, like right around 82, it switched over from comics and really into what is now called alternative comics. And they're still, alive and well today. There's a bunch of them out today. So you've got this whole new movement called alternative comics, which stemmed from the comics movement back in the 60s and 70s. And you will find these comics in regular comic book stores and specialty stores. So it's really moved from the obscure into more of the mainstream. So that's kind of the whole underground movement, in a nutshell. So you start out in the 1920s, where it's really forbidden, and they are just small printed little booklets. The artists and the writers, they remain anonymous because they don't want the authorities to know who they are. And then it kind of shifts into a little bit more of a mainstream kind of counterculture movement back in the 60s and 70s because of the standards set for mainstream comics. And then over time, they start becoming more mainstream and eventually turn into alternative comics, which are what we see today. So I hope you found that kind of interesting, because I really did. I thought that was pretty amazing. So check them out. There's a lot to look at, a lot of really cool illustrators. Be warned though, be careful when you're around young kids, because there is some questionable material in these books. But with that said, there is a lot of great artwork, great stories that you'll find in the comics genre. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and we are going to move on to our next section. Name that book. I've got a great book for you. The author is a well-known author. He's produced a lot of great work. This is one of, I think, his lesser-known works, but I think you will still enjoy it, and you may actually end up guessing it. So I will see you over on Name That Book. All right. Well, who knew about all those underground comics? That was a whole new world right there. Anyway, let's get on with Name That Book. So we're going to do a 5-minute read. I'm going to throw in a few clues for you, and then I'm going to meet you on the other side, and I'm going to tell you what the book is, tell you a little bit about it, and you're going to decide whether you want to read it or not. So anyway, let's name that book. Good luck.
They worked hard at Hioi's boat till noon, and then spread themselves on the weed close to the warmth of the creek and began their midday meal. The warlike nature of their reparations suggested many questions to Ransom. He knew no word for war, but he managed to make Hio understand what he wanted to know.
Did Cerrone and Hrassa and Fultrigi ever go out like this, with weapons, against each other?
What for?
Asked Hioi. It was difficult to explain.
If both wanted one thing and neither would give it,
said Ransom.
Would the other at last come with force? Would they say, give it or we kill you?
What sort of thing?
Well, food, perhaps.
If the other Gnaw wanted food, why should we not give it to them? We often do.
But how if we had not enough for ourselves?
But Malaldil will not stop the plants growing.
Hioi, if you had more and more young, would Malaldil broaden the Handramit and make enough plants for them all?
The Cerrone know that sort of thing. But why should we have more young?
Ransom found this difficult. At last he said,
Is the begetting of young not a pleasure among the Hrassa?
A very great one, man. This is what we call love.
If a thing is a pleasure, a man wants it again. He might want the pleasure more often than the number of young that could be fed.
It took Hioi a long time to get the point.
You mean that he might do it not only in 1 or 2 years of his life, but again?
Yes.
But why? Would he want his dinner all day or want to sleep after he had slept? I do not understand.
But a dinner comes every day. This love, you say, comes only once, while the Ross lives?
But it takes his whole life. When he is young, he has to look for his mate, and then he has to court her. Then he begets young. Then he rears them. Then he remembers all this and boils it inside him and makes it into poems and wisdom.
But the pleasure he must be content, only to remember?
That is like saying, my food I must be content only to eat.
I do not understand.
A pleasure is full grown only when it is remembered. You are speaking, man, as if the pleasure were one thing and the memory another. It is all one thing. The Cerrone could say it better than I say it now. Not better than I could say it in a poem. What you call remembering is the last part of the pleasure, as the cra is the last part of a poem. When you and I met, the meeting was over very shortly. It was nothing. Now it is growing something as we remember it. But still we know very little about it. What it will be when I remember it. As I lie down to die, what it makes in me all my days till then. That is the real meeting. The other is only the beginning of it. You say you have poets in your world. Do they not teach you this?
Perhaps some of them do, but even in a poem does a Ross never long to hear one splendid line over again?
Haioi's reply unfortunately turned on one of those points in their language which Ransom had not mastered. There were two verbs which both, as far as he could see, meant to long or yearn, but the Rasa drew sharp distinction, even in opposition, between them. Haioi seemed to him merely to be saying that everyone would long for it, one alone, but no one in his senses could long for it, bluntly.
And indeed, the poem is a good example. For the most splendid line becomes fully splendid only by means of all the lines after it. If you went back to it, you would find it less splendid than you thought. You would kill it. I mean in a good poem.
But in a bent poem, Haioi?
A bent poem is not listened to, man.
And how of love in a bent life?
How could the life of a Gnaw be bent?
Do you say, Haioi, that there are no bent Rasa?
I have heard of something like what you mean. It is said that sometimes here and there a cub at a certain age gets strange twists in him. I have heard of one that wanted to eat earth. There might, perhaps, be somewhere a Ross likewise that wanted to have the years of love prolonged. I have not heard of it, but it might be. I have heard of something stranger. There is a poem about a Ross who lived long ago in another Handramit, who saw things all made two suns in the sky, two heads on a neck, and last of all they say that he fell into such a frenzy that he desired two mates. I do not ask you to believe it, but that is the story, that he loved two Hresni.
Ransom pondered this. Here, unless Haioi was deceiving him, was a species naturally content, naturally monogamous. And yet, was it so strange? Some animals, he knew, had regular breeding seasons, and if nature could perform the miracle of turning the sexual impulse outward at all, why could she not go further and fix it, not morally but instinctively, to a single object? He even remembered dimly having heard that some terrestrial animals, some of the lower animals, were naturally monogamous. Among the Rasa, anyway, it was obvious that unlimited breeding and promiscuity were as rare as the rarest perversions. At last it dawned upon him that it was not they, but his own species, that were the puzzle. That the Rasa should have such instincts was mildly surprising. But how came it that the instincts of the Rasa so closely resembled the unattained ideals of that far-divided species man whose instincts were so deplorably different? What was the history of man? But Haioi was speaking again.
All right, so how did you do? Did you name that book? Well, if you didn't, the name of that book is Out of the Silent Planet. So this is book 1 of the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. Book 2 is the Paralandra, which was published in 1943. And then 2 years later, book 3, That Hideous Strength, was published in 1945. C.S. Lewis was a British author best known for his Chronicles of Narnia. That's right. So he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, fantastic set of books, and actually a very good movie. And on top of that, he was really good friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, one of my favorite authors. So the main character of the book is a Dr. Elwyn Ransom. He was a language specialist, He is kidnapped by two men who bring him to a planet called Malacandra, which is later discovered to be Mars. And their intent is to sacrifice him to the local inhabitants. However, upon arrival, Ransom quickly escapes, and he starts learning about the secrets of Malacandra. So as he's traveling along Malacandra, he meets numerous local species of intelligent life form who all live in harmony and who are all guided by a spiritual leader of Malacandra. And through his experiences, he is starting to learn that there is a stark contrast between the society of Malacandria and the society of Earth, where Earth is a very materialistic society, and Malacandrian society is a very peaceful society. So eventually, he catches back up with those two men who kidnap him. And he is tasked to get them back to Earth with his newfound knowledge that Earth, which is now called the Silent One because they're basically an outcast from the cosmos, and back to Earth with a new understanding of humanity's place in the universe. Very interesting book. It's a great read, and that is just book 1. So book 2 and 3 expand on that. So the book is available on Amazon in all forms. It's hardcover, softcover, ebook. There's even an audio book on YouTube. So I definitely recommend you to go check it out and see what you think. All right, so coming up next on self-publishing tips. Last time, we took a look on how to get our ideas out of our head onto paper using some tools. Now we're going to take a little bit closer look at some of those same tools on how we can refine our writing. So we've got a rough draft going on, and these tools are going to help us kind of zone in a little bit and tweak it and help us out. All right, so hang in there, because here comes self-publishing tips. All right, so welcome to some self-publishing tips. So this time we're going to take a look a little closer at some of the tools to help us kind of rewrite or tweak the writing we've already done. So last time I told you I was working on this little children's book about a little shrew named Tinley gets separated from his family in a farmer's field, and now he's got to work his way back to the other side of the field, and in the process, he's being chased by a fox, and along the way, he meets several new friends that help him in his journey. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to take one paragraph, and I'm going to show you a couple different methods to adjusting the structure, the language, the flow of that paragraph. Now, like I've said before, AI is not going to write the story for you. You're ultimately going to have to edit it on your own. However, these tools that I am showing you are fantastic to help you pull your story together. And like I've said before, the more tools you have in your toolbox, the better off you are. So we are going to take a look at just one paragraph so I can kind of show you how it works. And we will take a look at this second paragraph here. I'm just going to read it real quick to you. Tinley Meadow Whiskers, startled by the rustling in the trees, soon finds himself face to face with Finley Furtail, the sly fox. As Finley's coat glimmers in the moonlight, his emerald green eyes sparkle with mischief, and his pointy ears twitch with anticipation. Tinley's heart races as he realizes he has been spotted. Without hesitation, Finley gives chase, his agile form effortlessly keeping pace with Tinley's frantic dash along the stream. The shrew's tiny heart pounds in his chest as he scrambles, twisting and turning in a desperate attempt to lose his pursuer. So this is the part of the writing that the AI came up with initially, and this is based on my input on what I wanted to happen and my elements. And as I said last time, the elements, which are your characters, they are your settings, and they are objects within your story. The more description you have in each one of these elements, the more information the program has to pull from to give a deeper writing of your story. So we're going to take this one paragraph here. I have highlighted it, and I'm going to go up to Smart Writer. I'm going to choose Rewrite, and under Type, they've got Rephrase, Shorter, Show, Not Tell, which is kind of describing the scene versus being in the scene, More Inner Conflict, More Intense, or you can also customize it and kind of give it your own direction on what you want it to do. So I'm going to just hit Rephrase for this exercise. So I hit Rephrase, and I'm going to go down here and hit Rewrite. It's going to give me two options. So you see the first option, 3 paragraphs, second option, 2 paragraphs. So it's really expanded a lot more, but we can fine tune that if we want. So we would read through each one of these, and we would give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, depending on whether we like it or not, because that helps the program start to understand how we want to write and what we like and what we don't like. So we can use part of this, we can use all of it, we can insert it all in there and tweak a few pieces, or if we don't like it, any of it, we would hit thumbs down, hit another thumbs down, and then we would hit Rewrite. And what it's going to do is it's going to generate 2 more. So this will give us lots of options and lots of food for thought on how to fine tune or adjust a part of our story. And you can highlight more than one paragraph. I'm just highlighting the one paragraph to show the exercise. So now another tool that we can take a look at to do the same thing. So we are going to copy this, and then we are going to go over to Word. Okay, and then we are going to paste it in there. We are going to highlight it. Now, the program we're going to use in Word is called Grammarly. So we highlight what we want it to take a look at. And when you've got Grammarly turned on, you have this little icon up here. When you put your mouse over it, this little symbol pops open. You hit on that. Okay, so this is going to be a basic first little screen that comes up. So I want more ideas. All right, so under more ideas, we've got improve it, shorten it, clean up notes, make it more descriptive, make it more detailed, simplify it, make it informative, paraphrase it, summarize it, fix any mistakes, sound fluent, make it objective, sound professional, and there's more options as you go down. Rewrite in general audience, and so forth. So there's also one here, brand tone suggestions. So what this does, this kind of follows how you're writing, and it kind of will start understanding how you write. So we want to hit, well, actually we pick whichever one we want. So let's do sound more on brand. Okay, so we're going to click that. So now it's going to give us its idea of refining this paragraph. And again, we can read through this, and whether we like it or not, it's up to us. We can use some of it, all of it. If we don't like it, we can hit retry. And it's going to come up with another option. So that is 2 different options you've got already to take what you've written, and if you don't like it and you want to fine tune it, 2 options here I've already given you that you can fine tune what you've written. So now there's a third one, and this one is completely free. So we are going to, again, I'm just going to copy this same paragraph, and we are going to go over to the internet. All right. So I want to say, write with more adventure. And I'm going to paste in what I just copied. Okay. And hit enter. And then what you want to do is you want to go up here to Copilot Assist, click on that, and it will also come up with some options for you. And again, this is a third option to help you with writing that one paragraph. So these are 3 different ways you can take the one paragraph or multiple paragraphs or any part of your story and come up with different ideas. So again, the more tools you have, the better off you are. So we've really gone from, so far, I've got an idea in my head, right? I've come up with a blank piece of paper by using the dictation function in Word. I've simply have spoken what I want the computer to write. So as I'm thinking, I've spoken it out loud. It has written it down in Word. Then I've taken that and I brought it into Scribbler. So I've taken so that's the beginning of the story. And I have asked Scribbler to take it from there, and I've described the next scene I want it to do. And I've pulled in my elements, which I have already created for each one of these characters, each one of these settings, and any of the objects that I've got in this story. And I've pulled in each one of these elements as part of the description on what I want that scene to be. And then Scribbler has written out a couple of paragraphs based on what I want that scene to be. And now I've taken some parts of that scene and I've shown you 3 different methods of fine-tuning it. So all of these things are going to help you pull together your ideas for a story. And then you can, once you get everything pulled together, you can do your final editing and final tweaks and just pull your whole story together. So we're going to continue looking further into more tools that you can use. And next time we're going to probably take a look at actually formatting your book in order to get it to actually publish it. Because there's lots of ways to format a book, and there's a lot of little different tricks that you need to know to get that formatted so that when you send it up for self-publishing, you don't have any issues with your margins and so forth. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you try it out, see what you think, let me know. And I hope you've enjoyed the show. It's been a very interesting show this time. I've had a great time. I love your company. And remember, you want to always keep drawing, you want to always keep reading, and you want to always keep writing. And until next time, I hope you all have a great evening, and see you soon.